Welcome to Attachment Across the Lifespan, Part 3. We are now going to talk more about adult attachment. We've been talking about children and attachment, so it's now time to talk about adult attachment. Most of the research that had been done on attachment theory was primarily related to children, and there were some hypotheses about adult attachment, but not a whole lot going on. It's pretty much around children until Hazan and Shaver. They published something they called a love quiz in a local newspaper. They were curious about adult attachment, and so the love quiz was published, and people were asked to complete the quiz and mail it back to them, and they got hundreds and hundreds of responses. And this had the three types of attachment, which are secure, avoidant, and instead of ambivalent, they added anxious ambivalent. Now, Ainsworth didn't officially necessarily recognize anxious ambivalent, but other researchers did, and it kind of depends, because in her later writings she did call it anxious ambivalent, the other stage. So the stages that Hazan and Shaver chose to use were the exact same stages there that Ainsworth used. Bartholomew and Horowitz took it one step further and developed what they considered a relationship questionnaire, and they actually went back to Bowlby's original work here, and I want to show you a little bit about their model of self and others. If you go back to Bowlby's understanding of the child's model of self, in other words, I'm worth loving, I am a good person because people are taking care of me and meeting my needs, and the model of others, which is people are trustful, they can meet my needs, or they're mistrustful, my needs are not being met, or they're being met inconsistently. So Bartholomew and Horowitz took that a little bit step further, and they actually changed the type of attachment for adults to more fit into the model of self and others. And you'll see there on this side, I'm new at this, y'all. You have to keep. Anyway, worth loving and self-esteem, high self-esteem, or not worth loving and low self-esteem. Okay? And then the other side of that is trusting others or mistrusting others. So this is others. Now y'all know why I don't handwrite comments on your papers. And this is self. This side is self. Okay? So you've got 4 different options here for types of attachment. If someone believes that they are worth loving, they're worth being taken care of, they have a high self-esteem of themselves, they are a good person, that kind of thing, then and they trust others, then they would have a secure attachment, which goes hand in hand with the secure infants that we talked about. If, however, they believe they're worth loving or they have a high self-esteem but mistrust others, I have to look out for myself and no one else is going to, they would tend to have a dismissing type attachment. Okay, so high self-esteem, low trust in others. If the opposite of dismissing is preoccupied, it's a low self-worth but trusting others. Okay, so there's a trust. I am not very important. But if you say I am a good person, then I'm a good person. If you say that I'm good at something, I'm good at something. So I trust your opinion more than I trust myself. It's a preoccupied attachment. And then the opposite of secure is fearful, mistrusting others, and not loving self. So that's a sense of I'm not worth loving, I'm not good enough, important enough, whatever, and I can't trust anyone else to be. They're going to abandon me, they're going to leave me, they're not going to meet my needs. So those are the 4 models of self and others that we're going to use for adult attachment. Okay, hope go ahead and pull out the relationship questionnaire that you were supposed to complete before these series of talks, because we're going to get into that a little bit right now, okay? And I want to talk a little bit about each of the attachments. The first one is secure, which goes straight with the secure attached children. So generally, securely attached infants grow up to be securely attached adults. And again, if you have something happen in your life, a life event, you may move from a secure to an insecure attachment, or from an insecure to a more secure attachment. Anything other than the secure attachment is considered insecure. Makes sense? But we're going to specifically talk about the different attachments. A lot of researchers will say they're either secure or insecure, but there are very specific differences in attachment orientations, and I really think it's important that you understand that. Insecure, whoops, I did not mean to do that, I'm sorry. There we go, okay. In the secure attachment, you have a combination of the positive model self and others, like we talked about. And this is a sense of, I'm worth loving, I'm not worth loving. These secure people are comfortable with intimacy and close relationships. They tend to have very good boundaries. They tend to be able to make their own decisions, but they also take into consideration what other people say. They're pretty happy. And they know when they're under stress, so they know themselves pretty well. Let's try this again. There we go. The preoccupied, again, is a combination of negative model of self, but positive model of others. These are people that put their eggs in somebody else's basket. So again, if you say I'm wonderful, I'm wonderful. If you say I'm worth loving, then I'm worth loving. If you say I'm not, then I must not be. So instead of trusting their own judgment and making their own decisions, they tend to trust the judgment and go with the decisions of others. They tend to be followers. What you do have to realize is there's a continuum here. Someone can be more preoccupied or less preoccupied. Someone can have multiple can show signs of multiple attachments, and that's important to recognize. And in different situations, people can have different attachments, and we're going to talk about that hopefully in a little bit. But anyway, preoccupied like to be helpers and caregivers, and they're very good at that. Dismissing orientated people, or dismissing attached, have a positive model self and a negative model of others. So they trust themselves, but they don't trust other people. They tend to have negative expectations. They're going to disappoint me. I can't give them something to do because they're going to mess it up. And that is actually sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a lot of ways. They have negative expectations, and they are rarely disappointed. They tend to shield themselves by avoiding close relationships. They really strive for the independence and being invulnerable. So they tend to be a lot more cognitive than emotional. And they continue with that feeling of self-esteem by denying the importance of intimate, and I mean emotionally intimate, not necessarily physical intimacy, relationships. So anyone who's in a partnership with someone who's dismissing will say things like, I just don't always feel like I know this person. Okay, I don't know who they really are. They're not open to me. They work well independently. They're very dependable. They're in a lot of ways really good bosses because they're not really worried about the feelings of others in a lot of ways. So it is important to them to remain independent, so they tend not to seek emotionally intimate relationships. Now, many people who are dismissing are married. Many people who are dismissing are in partnerships. But what I'm talking about is an emotional connection, and that's okay. That's not a big deal. They're okay being independent, and that's very important. Fearful attached is a little bit different. They have the negative model of self and others. They avoid intimacy, but they want to have intimacy. So instead of like the dismissing who say, I'm okay with not emotionally intimate relationships, and realize this is on an unconscious level. Fearful want the intimate relationships, but they're terrified of them. So I want an intimate relationship, but I'm not good enough and you're going to hurt me. So there's constantly this pull in two different directions for people who have fearful attachments, and they tend to have higher rates of depression because there's constantly this pull back and forth between them. They want something, but they can't. They feel like they can't have it. Fearful people are in intimate relationships, but there's a lot of it's like I hate you, don't leave me kind of thing, and they tend to have a difficult time making decisions for themselves, but they also have a hard time listening to other people. So fearful tend to not do a whole lot. Like they don't make a decision until they're forced into it for some reason. So if a boss says, I need to know if you want the promotion, the fearful will say, I don't know, and the boss says, tell me right now, do you want the promotion or not? They might be able to make that decision, but they have to be, in a lot of ways, kind of pushed into it. Again, one of the things you need to understand is different people can have different attachment orientations in different environments. For example, with a partner, someone who was securely attached as an infant may have a secure attachment with their partner, and at home may be very open and loving and have a wonderful relationship or a good relationship, depending on what's going on in their lives. But if they have, say, if they work in an environment where there's a lot of backstabbing, a lot of blaming, they might actually become have a different type of attachment, whether it may be dismissing, well, you people don't know what you're talking about, I know what I'm doing with my job, or they might be fearful, should I say this, should I not say this, what's going to happen, did I trust them, I don't trust my own judgment, because when I think I'm doing something right, they're telling me I'm doing something wrong. So do realize that there are different people that have different types of attachments in different situations, and Bowlby did say that that can occur. Additionally, someone can have an insecure type attachment, work very hard on themselves, work in counseling, and really delve deep into themselves to change those behaviors in relationships, and end up having secure relationships and having a secure attachment as an adult or as a later adult. So the part of attachment theory that I hold to, which is called prototype, but anyway, is that these attachment orientations can change, and Bowlby did say that. There's a lot of evidence of that. There's the other side of attachment theory where people believe that once you have the attachment as a child, that's it, that's the end. I just think that's a little hopeless in some cases, especially the children that have severe attachment disorders. I think that there's a lot you can do with people with attachment issues. So, implications for counselors. I was going to get to the slide. Attachment and the therapeutic relationship. The therapist can be a safe base for the clients, just like a parent should be a safe base for the infant or child. So what you have to do is model a secure orientation. So if you have an insecure orientation, you have to learn to control those behaviors in the therapeutic process, in the counseling process. Attachment theory helps counselors understand the clients and help the clients understand their relationships with others, because this attachment stuff permeates every part of our being, and it is completely how we relate to others. So someone who is preoccupied, say, would tend to be the chaser in a relationship, would tend to even in friendships, be the one always calling, let's go do this, be not the aggressor is not the correct word, but definitely initiate things in a relationship. And they might do that all the way across the board, and they might also be very good helpers. So I always say that churches can't function without churches and synagogues, and cannot function without preoccupied, attached people, because it's the preoccupied people that want to give and give and give and do and do and do, and they get things done in those types of organizations. I think universities in some ways are like that too. Preoccupied people tend to help universities run as well. But anyway, and schools and other things, because they'll get the job done. They'll do whatever they need to do. Okay. The other thing we need to understand is that the client will interact with the counselor the same way they interact in other relationships. It's a microcosm of the real world. And so what you see in the session is close or identical to what they will exhibit in the real world with other people, because counseling is a very intimate relationship. Boundaries, yes. Power differential, yes, but also a very intimate relationship in a lot of ways. And so if you know the attachment orientation of your client, you can really begin to understand how they relate to other people and how they're relating to you. And the other thing is, at this point in counseling with attachment issues, self-esteem is the key issue. You work with their self-esteem and their trust of others in order to help them modify their behaviors to make their lives what they want them to be. We don't go into a relationship with clients saying you need to change such and such. It's obviously up to the client to make the decisions on their goals. But attachment theory can help them have better relationships in their lives and maintain their relationships. And the majority of people that come to counseling because of relationship issues. At this point, I want you to go back to your RQ that you filled out, and we're going to take a look at it. The first paragraph, number 1, it's easy for me to be emotionally close to others. That is a securely attached person. Number 2 is I am comfortable without close relationships. That's dismissing. Number 3, I want to be emotionally intimate with others, but I find that others are reluctant to get as close as I would like. That's preoccupied. Preoccupied, depending on how preoccupied they are in their attachments. Remember, there's a continuum here. Always feel like I love you more than you love me, or I'm more invested in this relationship than you are. Number 4 is I am uncomfortable getting close to others. I want emotionally close relationships but find it difficult to trust others. That's obviously fearful. So now you have an idea of your attachment orientation, and this is a very valid instrument that I've used in my research but also has been used in many, many, many studies. Very simple, down to earth. Now you might have found that you had 2 paragraphs that had the same number, which is why that bottom part says pick the number that you feel best describes you of those 4, because we can have several different types of attachment, as I said before. But in general, we have one attachment, especially if we're under stress. We have one particular attachment that we tend to gravitate toward. Okay. So when you have a securely attached client, this client will come to counseling because they know they're under stress. They know they're in distress and that they need help. So they tend to seek help, turn to others for support, because securely attached people trust others and trust relationships with others, and realize that it's reciprocal, a give and take relationship. They tend to be very flexible in their relationships with others. They understand, again, it's reciprocal, give and take. They do present in counseling pretty often, but mostly as a response to a crisis. If they've moved into a new area and they're having a hard time adjusting, if their house burned down, if they are in the process of having a divorce, those kinds of things, they'll show up in counseling and they'll know why. So in a lot of ways, many of the clients that you see will be securely attached, which helps. The idea is that it helps to understand that the majority of the clients that you're going to see, the majority of the people in the population are securely attached. One thing that you also need to understand is somebody might come to you and seem to have one of the insecure type attachments, but when you help them work through some of their issues, they may go back to being secure. So if originally they were secure, they revert to an insecure style when they're under stress or in a crisis. So the goal of the counseling with a securely attached client would be to return that client to pre-crisis functioning. Preoccupied, which was the anxious/ambivalent attachment in childhood, was more the anxious side of the anxious ambivalent, is often preoccupied with their partner, like we talked about before. So they come to counseling when they're really worried about separation, when they're in the process of having a relationship end, or a relationship has ended, or they fear that that relationship is in trouble. They will show up in counseling. When preoccupied attached people tend to be emotional, sometimes overly emotional. They'll present you'll think that they're maybe a little bit overreacting in some ways. They tend to feel very overwhelmed when they're faced with any type of such separation. So they just don't know what to do or where to turn. And if you realize that they have placed their entire sense of self into someone else, when that person walks away, they now do not have a sense of self. So preoccupied have like a self-esteem cup, and people can fill it up. Once they get their cup filled up for a little while, then they tend to back off, and they don't need to please as much. So you'll find someone who tries to please and gets a lot of praise, and all of a sudden they back off for a while, and you're like, they're not doing as good a job as they did before. And then when someone says, you're not doing as good a job as you did before, they realize that they need to spend more time getting their self-esteem taken care of, and so then they help again, and then somebody says they're wonderful, and then they back off again. So the same thing is going to happen in counseling sessions. The goal of counseling is to regulate the intense feelings that they're feeling, and also increase their self-esteem so they don't need to rely on others for their self-esteem. Dismissing attached tends to regulate emotions by dismissing them. This really would be in childhood would be more of the avoidant, yeah, go away, go away, go away kind of thing. They avoid relationships with others or minimize the relationship. It's very important that people who are dismissing be independent. Again, the counselor can use confrontation to prevent dismissal or minimizing of emotions. The idea is to take someone who's very cognitive and bring them more into their emotions, because dismissing are opposite of preoccupied. They're too cognitive, or preoccupied are too emotional. And so dismissing, you need to bring them back into that emotional and begin to recognize emotions. And a lot of times, people who are dismissing don't even recognize their own emotions. So there's a lot of work to be done in that area. And confrontation tends to work very well. The goal of counseling is to show them that they're not being rejected or dismissed, that it's okay to feel feelings and you're not going to be rejected. Because remember, the idea is that they don't trust others. Others are not going to live up to any expectations that I have. And that has been reinforced over and over and over again. And then you have to provide that safe base for dismissed clients, because you want them to understand that they're safe to experience emotions and behaviors related to their relationships. The last attachment style is, and how to deal with it in counseling, is fearful. Again, fearful. They daydream about success, but they don't quite get anywhere. They lack assertiveness. They're highly dependent, but they don't want to be dependent. So they can be angry. They get these when fearful students are in my classes. They will tend to ask lots and lots and lots of questions, and tend to need a lot of reinforcement from me, and then they get angry with me about halfway through the semester because they realize that they're depending on me for information or to reassure them. And it's really interesting watching fearfully attached students change from wanting you to not wanting you. Again, I love you, I hate you kind of thing. Not that they love me, but many fearful people are often passive aggressive. So they'll do things that they don't realize that they're doing. If they're passed over for promotion, suddenly the person who was promoted, things happen, like projects don't get finished for them, stuff like that. So they'll work out their aggression towards others, but they'll do it very differently. And in students, fearful students will give positive feedback to me or to any other professor, and then in the evaluation, it's just absolutely right that we're the most horrible teachers they've ever had. So that's an example of the passive aggressive stuff. The fearful are very emotional, like preoccupied under stress, because fearful have preoccupied and dismissing the negative parts of that, I guess you could say. So they want to be independent, but they're not independent. A counselor should be a safe base, using confrontation, teaching social skills, because fearful have not had a lot of relationships, so they lack those social behaviors and social skills and reading others and interpreting others, and they don't trust their own interpretations, and also specific independent skills. And the goal of counseling here is really to promote independence and raise self-esteem as well as trust in others, and you can start with trust in the counselor. I'm sure at this point that you have plenty questions. You are more than welcome to go ahead and place your questions on Blackboard under class discussion, questions for professor. You are also welcome to write any questions that you have down and bring them to class, and we will absolutely discuss them in class. Thank you. This is the end of your attachment presentations.